The nation's COVID-19 tally reaches a new high. Hundreds of small neighborhood hospitals and clinics are assigned to treat coronavirus patients in response to the Omicron surge. The South Korean government expressed strong regret over Japan's decision to recommend the controversial Sado mine as UNESCO World Heritage and urged Tokyo to stop such a move. The annual exodus for the Lunar New Year holiday begins. Many South Koreans hit the road for family gatherings at their hometowns. Well, we'll be wrapping up the week well. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let us begin with the top story at this hour. South Korea is reporting record-high daily COVID-19 tally again, this time exceeding 16,000. With these numbers recorded, authorities say the new response system enables the country to efficiently deal with the spike and reduce strain on the medical system. They've also approved the vaccine from Novavax for use starting next month. Shin Yeon starts us off.
South Korea on Friday saw another record-high daily tally at 16,096. This is the fourth day in a row that the country reached an all-time high number of daily infections. Figures have doubled faster than authorities had forecast, mainly due to the spread of the Omicron variant. But the Prime Minister said the situation is under control.
Maybe because people perceive Omicron to be less fatal, or thanks to our well-prepared Omicron strategy, we've all been handling the surge in new infections quite well. We've managed to raise booster shot rates among seniors, secured enough hospital beds, constantly enhanced equipment for at-home treatment, and expedited the use of antiviral pills.
This aligns with the country's latest Omicron-tailored virus prevention strategy. One of the key measures is the more widespread use of rapid antigen test kits. As of now, only 4 areas in Korea have them. But they will be available at all testing sites nationwide from this Saturday. And they will become the only testing method for most of the population starting February 3rd. People over 60, those at high risk, or those who came to close contact with an infected person will still use PCR tests. But everyone else will have to test themselves with a rapid antigen test kit at testing sites or local hospitals. Meanwhile, from February, Novavax will become the 5th type of vaccine available in South Korea. The shots will be first used on the unvaccinated or those at high risk. Also, a new study on Moderna booster shots by Duke Health has found that Omicron antibody levels drop more than 6-fold after 6 months have passed since getting an extra jab. Moderna's CMO recognized this data and said to tackle Omicron, sustainable methods are needed to provide the highest level of protection. Shin Yeon, Arirang News.
Starting Thursday, local health clinics will diagnose and treat COVID-19 patients. This will be done through the so-called one-stop system. Choi Min-jung explains how it works.
People in South Korea will soon be able to get diagnosed and treated for COVID-19 at local clinics. This will be done through the so-called one-stop system. So how does the new one-stop system work? If a person is experiencing a fever or respiratory problems, they can visit a designated local clinic and get tested for COVID-19 using a rapid antigen test. If the person tests positive, they would then have to take a PCR test. Once the person is finally confirmed to have COVID-19, they will receive a prescription and medication and are monitored by the clinic while taking their treatment at home. So when does it start? The new system will be in place starting February 3rd. And more than 430 respiratory clinics nationwide will provide the service. Another 1,000 clinics are expected to treat COVID-19 patients as the government is still receiving applications from more health facilities. And how will patients be treated at home? First, in high-risk cases, people can get PCR tests at public health centers or at testing centers. Once they test positive and are assigned to be treated at home, they will be monitored by hospitals 24/7. Medical staff will check their health 2 times a day. On the other hand, those who are at lower risk can get rapid antigen tests as well as PCR tests if needed at doctors' clinics. These clinics will be treating the patients and checking their health once a day. Since clinics do not operate 24 hours a day, hospitals will take charge of managing these patients after 7 p.m. As of Friday, more than 50,000 people are being treated at home. Health authorities are aiming to expand the capacity to cover a maximum of 110,000 people ahead of a potential uptick in cases in February. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The self-quarantine period for all inbound travelers will be reduced to 7 days starting February 4th. The South Korean government earlier required everyone arriving into the country to quarantine for 10 days regardless of vaccination status. The latest revision comes in line with the Omicron-tailored virus prevention system. Entry restriction for foreigners arriving from 11 African countries on short-term visas will be lifted on February 4th. On the eve of the Lunar New Year holiday, we are expecting to see traffic slowly build up as South Koreans start heading to their hometowns for family get-togethers. Our Kim Do-yeon is out at the Seoul toll gate, the city's main gateway on the southern side. Do-yeon, how's it looking out there?
Good evening, Daniel. Here at the Seoul toll gate, cars are now getting by without hitting a traffic jam. But a couple of hours ago, we saw cars lined up trying to get through, maybe to start off their holiday a bit earlier than everyone else. The Transport Ministry says it's expecting nearly 4.8 million people to hit the road each day throughout the holiday. That's nearly 29 million people in total over the next 5 days. This is 17% more than last year, but still fewer than before the pandemic. 91% of people who are traveling this year said they will be taking their cars, and that means the freeways will see some traffic. The peak time for going out of Seoul is expected to be tomorrow morning, when the estimated travel time to Busan will be nearly 7 hours. On the way back into Seoul, the peak seems to be next Tuesday.
Well, doing right now, Korea is experiencing its biggest surge of COVID-19 to date, and the government is asking people to stay home. But we're seeing many people hitting the road anyway.
That's right, Daniel. This is the second Seollal or Korean Lunar New Year under the pandemic, and second time around for many other major holidays. In what I can see from the general public is that public's opinion is that people have been putting off on their home visits for far too long. I was actually at a nearby rest stop before and spoke to a few people. Take a listen.
I'm not too worried because anyway I'm using my own car. If I don't go down to Daegu during this holiday, I don't know when I can go.
No, I still worry. But honestly, I heard that Omicron is less likely to result in severe illness despite being more transmissible. So that's why I'm less concerned.
That's certainly not to say they won't be following the virus prevention measures, and many are used to the rules which were in place last year too. For instance, from tomorrow, there will be no eating inside highway rest areas, and people will be encouraged to eat in their cars if they have to. This will be in effect until next Wednesday, the last day of this holiday. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Do-yeon, thank you for those updates. Let's move over to our Kim Yeon-sung, who is out at Seoul Station. Yeon-sung, what's the latest over there?
Right, Daniel. So as you know, it's after 9 p.m. So all the shops have closed down. But as you can see behind me, there are still people coming and going. And that's because trains are still running at this hour. I've been here since the afternoon, and the place does seem a little emptier than usual. And I've been talking to some vendors and passengers, and they've all agreed. The place did seem a little less busier than usual compared to other Fridays, let alone for a Seollal holiday. Take a listen.
I remember Seoul Station being really crowded, but there seems to be fewer people now. I think it's because of Omicron and the increase in infections.
So, Yeon-sung, can we presume that fewer people are traveling out of Seoul for this Lunar New Year holiday?
Well, not necessarily. Korea Railroad Corporation, or also known as KORAIL, has said that roughly 84% of the train seats have been reserved as of Friday 4 p.m. Now, that's a similar figure compared to other Seollal holidays, but it could seem a little less busier here at Seoul Station because KORAIL have increased the frequency of their trains for the upcoming Seollal holiday, so to prevent overcrowding. Also, like Do-yeon mentioned earlier, more people are taking their own cars to travel. On top of that, more people have chosen to travel to Jeju Island for this 5-day-long holiday. Jeju Tourism Organization estimates that roughly 207,000 people will visit the island this holiday, which is a 35% increase from last year, so it's probably busier at airports than it is at this train station. The organization says that people are taking the opportunity to visit Jeju Island during this long holiday, and with gatherings of up to 6 people now allowed, the number of family and group tours have increased. Of course, we hope that everyone stays safe and is aware of the prevention guidelines while they're enjoying their holidays, like this little fellow that I've talked to earlier.
We have to be careful by washing our hands and wearing masks, even after we come back from our travels.
All right, thank you so much for being out there for us, Hyun-sung. We appreciate it. The South Korean government expressed strong regret over Japan's decision to recommend the controversial Sado mine as UNESCO World Heritage and has sternly urged for a retraction. Sado mine is where at least 1,000 Koreans were subjected to forced labor during World War II. So Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jong-un on Friday night summoned the Japanese ambassador to Seoul, Koichi Aiboshi, to lodge a protest. In 2015, Japanese industrial sites, including Hashima Island, where Koreans were forcibly taken to work at coal mines, were designated as World Heritage Sites, following Japan's promise to acknowledge its use of forced labor. But Japan is yet to fulfill its promise in this regard. President Moon Jae-in has sent a letter to Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev thanking him for last year's repatriation to Korea of the remains of Korean independence fighter Hong Bum-do. The top office said Friday that Moon exchanged letters with Tokayev and the leaders of Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan to mark 30 years of diplomatic relations. Last year, the remains of Hong Bum-do were sent to Korea by Kazakhstan, the country where Hong died after serving as a commander of the Korean Independence Army during Japanese colonial rule. Hong led his troops to victory in major battles against Imperial Japan, but later moved to the Russian Far East as Japanese oppression intensified and was deported to Kazakhstan under the forced migration policy of then Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. North Korea claims to have successfully tested warheads of tactical guided missiles and long-range cruise missiles this week. By showing these two different types off, the regime seems to be emphasizing the power and diversity of its weapon systems. Bae Eun-ji provides a deeper analysis.
Following the 2 rounds of missile launches on Tuesday and Thursday, North Korea has released details of this week's missile tests. The North state-run media KCNA reported Friday that the missiles it fired the day before were surface-to-surface tactical guided missiles. Surface-to-surface missiles are designed to be launched from the ground or the sea to hit targets on land or at sea. The state media said the 2 missiles successfully hit an island target, which proved the power of their warheads. It added that it'll keep on developing powerful warheads capable of performing combat functions and missions. Photos released by KCNA showed that the missiles appeared to be the North Korean version of Russia's Iskander, KN-23. The photos also showed that they were fired from a transporter erector launcher, which are vehicles used to carry, elevate, and then launch missiles. On Thursday, the South Korean military said it detected 2 suspected ballistic missiles fired toward the East Sea from North Korea's Hamhung area. This was the 6th launch by the North this month, coming just 2 days after it fired 2 cruise missiles on Tuesday. The military said the missiles traveled 190 kilometers at an altitude of 20 kilometers.
North Korea has never fired a missile with a maximum altitude below 20 kilometers. A maximum altitude of 20 kilometers means that it flew at a very low altitude throughout its journey. This makes it difficult for our missile defense system to intercept.
The state media also reported that what was launched on Tuesday were long-range cruise missiles, 3 days after it fired them. It said the missiles flew for about 2.5 hours before precisely hitting an island target 1,800 kilometers away. It added that the combat performance of this type of missile would boost the country's war deterrence. Earlier on Tuesday, South Korean military officials had said that the North appeared to have fired 2 cruise missiles from an inland area. The firing of 2 different types of missiles on different dates appears to be the regime's way of showing its capability to hit targets by displaying its diverse arsenal.
It's probably the first time that the North has reported details on 2 different launches on the same day. If the North were to fire a cruise missile and a ballistic missile at the same time, our missile defense system will be confused, making it hard to intercept.
배은지, Arirang News.
Following North Korea signaling that it could resume nuclear and ICBM tests, the regime's leader reportedly visited a munitions factory. It's widely seen that Pyongyang is focusing more on arms rather than talks. Yoon Jung-min has the full story.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly visited a munitions factory which produces key weapon systems, signaling a stronger emphasis on the regime's military capabilities. The Korean Central News Agency reported the news on Friday. Kim was accompanied by his sister Kim Yo-jong, Party Secretary Cho Yong-won, and other officials in charge of weapons development. Kim reportedly stressed the importance of modernizing the armed forces and carrying out defense development strategies, as well as his determination for powerful, state-of-the-art weapons. Officials at the factory reportedly praised Kim for, quote, crushing the challenges by U.S. imperialists and their followers, evidently aiming a message toward the U.S. Kim Jong-un last visited a munitions factory in 2019. The visit comes amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula following a series of missile tests by North Korea this month, while the U.S. is seeking to bolster sanctions on the regime. Last week, the North signaled it would reconsider its moratorium on nuclear and ICBM tests, which are often considered as a so-called U.S. red line. Pyongyang announced suspending nuclear and ICBM tests in 2018 to show preemptive goodwill, but the regime says the U.S. continues to have hostile policies toward them. While the U.S. bolsters sanctions, it calls for dialogue and diplomacy. Experts see the prospects for a resumption of talks between Pyongyang and Washington less likely for the time being, considering the current confrontation.
Kim Jong-un is very clearly mentioned that the United States is the arch enemy, and then he is going to improve his own country's capability to counter against United States' so-called imperialistic ambition. So far, unless United States has withdrawn its so-called hostile policy towards North Korea, it is very unlikely that North Korea wanted to resume this talk.
Some also point out that North Korea isn't a high priority for the U.S. right now, which makes dialogue more difficult. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are reportedly planning to hold a meeting of their foreign ministers in mid-February in Hawaii to discuss North Korea's missile tests. According to Kyodo News, the meeting would reportedly include Seoul's Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong, America's Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Tokyo's Yoshimasa Hayashi. This will be the first trilateral session since Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida took office in October. Russia's deputy foreign minister says six-party talks are the best platform to reach a comprehensive solution on the Korean peninsula. This comes amid heightened tensions fueled by Pyongyang's latest successive missile launches. Speaking to TASS on Friday, Igor Morgulov said there would be no dialogue regarding the peninsula's nuclear issue if the U.S. and its allies continue to pursue changes in the regime. He noted that Washington has yet to take practical steps, but added the six-party talks may resume if the Biden administration is committed to establishing peace in the region. The talks began in 2003 among the two Koreas, the U.S., Russia, China, and Japan, to resolve the nuclear crisis, but were halted in 2009. Leading up to the March 9th presidential election, the candidates will hold two rounds of debates, one during and other after the Lunar New Year holiday. The first debate of the election is a two-way session on January 31st between the two leading contenders, the ruling Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung and the main opposition People Power Party's Yoon Suk-yeol. It's expected to be live-streamed instead of being televised. There will also be a four-way debate involving two other minor candidates, the Justice Party's Shim Sang-jung and People's Party's An Chol-soo. It will be aired on three major broadcasters on February 3rd. This comes as the two top contenders decided to go ahead with their initially planned one-on-one, in addition to having a four-way debate requested by minor candidates. In 2021, South Korea's industrial output rose by the most in 11 years, partly because the year before it had actually declined, but also because exports were booming. It's the first time in 4 years that industrial output, consumption, and business investment all spiked. Here's Min Soo-kyun with a breakdown of the figures.
South Korea's overall industrial production last year saw its biggest jump in 11 years. According to Statistics Korea on Friday, industrial output increased 4.8% in 2021, bouncing back from a 1.2% fall in 2020. It marks the largest growth since 2010. The agency attributed some of the rise to the base effect following the previous year's fall, but stressed that the growth was largely driven by the economic recovery as well as strong exports. By sector, output in mining and manufacturing rose 6.9% last year on the back of semiconductor production, while services gained 4.3%. In particular, in-person services like restaurants and accommodation, wholesale and retail saw positive growth despite the pandemic. And so did transport and warehousing, as well as finance and insurance. Retail sales, a barometer for private consumption, also bounced back to see the largest increase since 2010. Consumer demand was up 5.5% last year, led by sales of clothing, cosmetics, and cars. And facility investment also surged 9% on year. It's the first time in 4 years that the nation's industrial output, consumption, and investment have all seen annual growth. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi touted the results, saying the economy has proved to be strong even when in crisis. However, while acknowledging potential risks to the economy, Hong vowed to closely monitor the situation and proactively deal with growing internal and external uncertainties. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
The U.S. economy saw its largest growth in almost 4 decades, seeing substantial growth in the final 3 months of 2021. President Biden stressed the American economy grew faster than China's for the first time in 20 years, but experts say this trend is not expected to last long. Kim Bo-kyung helps us look beyond the digits.
In 2021, the U.S. economy grew at its fastest rate in 37 years. A report by the Commerce Department on Thursday said the country's GDP jumped 5.7% last year. That's the biggest increase since 1984, when the figure exceeded 7%. This comes as the U.S. recorded a 6.9% annual growth rate in the fourth quarter, well above the 5.5% predicted by most economists. Since July 2020, when the U.S. experienced the peak of the first COVID-19 wave, the country's economy has grown for 6 consecutive quarters. President Biden praised the country's growth. In a statement released on the White House website, he said that during his first year in office, the country is finally building an American economy for the 21st century, not only growing at its fastest pace in nearly 4 decades, but also recording its largest job growth in history. He added that for the first time in 2 decades, the U.S. economy grew faster than China's. However, an expert says it is unclear whether the U.S. will be able to continue such a high growth rate. The main reasons for the growth were the bounce-back effect from the decline the U.S. had in 2020, the low interest rate the country has been maintaining to combat the pandemic, and the government's aggressive assistance, all of which are expected to be hard to continue.
Interest rate will rise this year. Government aid will be reduced, so the amount of spending may not be as high as it was last year. So it will be very difficult for the United States to match the growth rate of 2021 and 2022.
Meanwhile, Biden urged U.S. lawmakers to swiftly pass his administration's Build Back Better Act, which entails a $1.75 trillion investment in social programs and climate policy, saying this could help sustain the growth momentum. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Dusty conditions have now eased off, but colder temperatures are taking over. Mornings will get frostier for this weekend, with the capital area starting off at -7 degrees Celsius. The Arctic air will make temperatures feel colder than the actual readings. Dressing in layers will be recommended to keep your body temperatures warm. Meanwhile, dry conditions are persisting across eastern regions. For coastal areas of Gyeongsangnam-do province, dry weather advisories have been raised to warnings. Gusty offshore winds are also in the forecast, which raises the risk of wildfires. For those in the area, please be careful with anything that can start a fire. Morning lows will be 1 to 3 degrees lower than today. Chuncheon will be cold at -10 degrees. Expect partly cloudy to overcast skies for the daytime. Seoul will reach 2 degrees, Gwangju 5, Daegu and Gyeongju will make it to 6 degrees. On Tuesday, which is the actual day of the holiday, heavy snows in the forecast for central regions and Seollal province. Have a great holiday, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
It's time to wrap things up. As always, thank you for staying with us.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.